The drought-breaking rain over eastern and inland Australia is having an unwelcome and potentially devastating side effect. Farmers in 4 states are bracing themselves for a plague of locusts. Large parts of New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia are expecting the insects to begin hatching between now and mid-October, posing a multi-billion-dollar threat to the grains industry. And aerial spraying is already underway in Queensland's central west in anticipation of the biggest locust plague since the 70s. From Blackall in Western Queensland, Peter McCutcheon reports.
A low-flying helicopter in Queensland's central west appears to stir up a dust cloud. But this is no bull dust, but rather a swarm of very hungry and potentially destructive insects.
There was one swarm that was 9 k's by 3 k's large. We've also seen
9 k's by 3 k's?
Yes, so there are some big swarms out there.
Queensland authorities this winter are carrying out their largest locust spraying operation in more than a decade.
When you're getting densities like swarm densities we're seeing now up to 50 per square metre, they can have a huge impact on crops.
And in southern states, the number of locust eggs in the ground suggests they're facing one of the worst springs in more than 30 years.
We've got very high density layings, up to 10,000 eggs per square metre in some instances.
I've never seen anything quite that bad ever before. I have seen locusts around before, but nothing to that extent.
After years of drought, there's been consecutive seasons of good rainfall across much of eastern and inland Australia, from the Gulf down to western New South Wales. That's great news, not only for farmers, but also for locusts.
When you've had a number of dry years where the population has been suppressed due to drought, and then you have a period of good conditions, such as we've had for the first 6 months of this year, then you get a major population explosion.
Locust plagues have always been a part of Australian agriculture, with the notorious outbreak in the 1930s before the introduction of aerial spraying. This 1950s Victorian government documentary shows how the problem was dealt with over half a century ago.
There's a very heavy swarm over here at the back of Carousel, Jack.
Yes, Jeff. I was on my way to Emerald, and there's a huge swarm of locusts in Rosemount on the Narberthong Road. Went for about 5 k's.
In some ways, not much has changed.
If I think that they don't know about them, I'll give Jeff Swan at DNR a ring, and helicopter comes out the next day.
It's still our best source of information. Landholders are always constantly ringing us saying, you know, we've got locusts in this area, and that's how we base our spray operations.
You can see the EVs there just stirring them all up, so we're getting a lot higher density swarm now.
Jeff Swan from Biosecurity Queensland and his brother Duncan are part of a team searching for and destroying the locust. Unlike the 1950s, they have the use of helicopters and GPS technology.
Yeah, there's another target just out to our right here.
We actually have to survey for the locust originally, so we do ground survey, followed by aerial survey once we've found suitable targets.
Spraying for the locust is complex. It can take days of preparation. Biosecurity Queensland officers are surveying this area to work out where the insecticide should be sprayed and where it shouldn't.
We're flying quite low to the ground, a couple of metres off the ground, and using the rotor wash to stir the locusts up, and then we can visually assess their density to work out whether it is a swarm. And then once we've done that, if we have located a swarm, then we can identify the boundaries of that swarm so we can target it for spraying.
So if you just spray up to and including that tree line, you can come over it if you like.
A fixed-wing aerial sprayer has flown in from Emerald 300 kilometres away.
We actually mark the targets from the air, pass that information to the spray plane.
Yeah, just keep going over that tree line just in front of you there.
This work requires a fair degree of precision to avoid organic farms, protected waterways and properties where stock is being prepared for transport. Although this area around the Blackhall-Barcaldine region is mainly grazing land, the idea is to create a huge buffer zone to stop the locusts migrating east and south.
The priority is to protect that cropping country in the Central Highlands and Darling Downs, so we do the work out here so we don't have to do the work there, and we're really protecting that resource in the grain country.
The species of locust found in Western Queensland, the spur-throated locust, hit the town of Longreach in April. This species remains active throughout the winter, but usually only swarms in its young adult stage before the spring. The species found further south, the Australian plague locust, lies low over the colder months and is only now beginning to hatch.
This is probably one of the best seasons that Australia's eastern grain growers have had for the last decade, and unfortunately it means that those grain crops in large extent have got a threat hanging over them from locusts. It might be worth putting some aerial surveillance over the area than what we'd try and come out of Tibbaburra in the first instance.
Chris Adriansen is the director of the Australian Plague Locust Commission, which oversees management of the pest across state boundaries.
It's really a case of having to wait until they hatch and then also to wait until those nymphs start to aggregate into their highest densities so that the minimum amount of country can be applied with insecticide to be able to deal with the outbreak that we've got.
Gee, there's a lot of eggs here, isn't there, Jeff?
It certainly is.
Victorian sheep and grains farmer Jeff Weeks is waiting nervously, having experienced in autumn a taste of what he's in for.
They did a lot of damage to our pastures. We had a lot of grass, and all of a sudden it just like as if it was sprayed with Roundup, and we were actually nearly starting to feed our stock.
Eastern Australia may be facing one of its worst locust plagues in a generation, but at least authorities have some warning, and farmers are hoping the pestilence can be contained.
The conditions that give rise to a good cropping season and a good grazing season are also the conditions that often lead to most significant locust infestations and outbreaks. So it's an unfortunate coincidence of nature.
But for years we've been praying for rain. We've had a couple of good summers and now we've got this.
Yeah, it's always a problem that, what's good for cows is good for locusts.
Peter McCutcheon reporting from the outback.